Hello, Green Bay Packer fans. Today we are doing a tier list of the greatest Packer wide receivers of all time with stats to back it up. We'll go through all the tiers. Let me know what you think down below. Give it a like, subscribe, and comment, all of that jazz. And let's get into the tier list of the greatest Packers wide receivers of all time, because there are a lot of great ones out there that seemingly get forgotten about in terms of NFL history. Let's be honest, it's just true. First, we have the best of all time tier. These are truly the best of the best. Probably only a handful of guys that truly belong up here. Then the great tier. These are the guys that just miss out. The good but not great are guys that you remember doing well, but were never really dominated. Were never the most dominant wide receivers in the league. Then you got the forgotten stars that there are only a few that will probably be in here. The guys that names that you just like, oh, he was great. He had a great career, but not the first ones to come to your mind. And then we got why are they here? There's probably only one, maybe two guys that even belong in this tier because they're like, why? They're not all-time Packer great wide receivers for sure. But let's get into it with the greatest to ever put on a Green Bay Packers uniform at wide receiver, than the great Sterling Sharp. I mean, this guy was fantastic, and had he not been injured, had he not suffered that terrible neck injury, he is pound for pound the best wide receiver, along with the likes of Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, and Terrell Owens. I mean, he was prolific. I mean, he had a 3 or 4 year period where he just could not be stopped. He was just all world, really helped Brett Favre out a lot. 669 receptions, over 8,000 receiving yards, 65 touchdowns, 13.7 yards per reception, 79 yards for a long, and 9 fumbles, which is a pretty good total considering the career that he had. So about a fumble per year, so that's pretty darn good. But he was great. And again, had he not been injured, had he been able to play with the Packers when they were going to Super Bowls, Packers probably get at least another 1 or 2 Super Bowls, and the rest of the NFL would probably be grieving over that because, you know, a lot of announcers out there, a lot of the intelligentsia in the NFL seemingly hate the Packers for some reason, even though there's no reason to hate the Packers at all. I mean, the small market team, look at what they did, greatest franchise in NFL history. How could you hate them? It's not like the Patriots, not like the cheaters at the NFL. But next we have the great James Lofton, who I like to point out that whoever created this list, I'm sorry. I mean, you put it together a pretty good tier list, but the fact that you left James Lofton out shows that you may just be a casual. I don't want to say that, but I mean, it's like he's a Hall of Famer for the Packers. He should be on this list. Should have been a no-brainer right when you thought of it, but 530 receptions, almost 10,000 receiving yards, 18.2 yards per reception. That's fantastic. 49 touchdowns, a little low compared to the other guys in this list. 80 yard long and 14 fumbles. So he had a little bit of a fumble problem at times. But when you look at the teams that he composed in, was part of, they were bad. I mean, for a long time, the Packers were one of the worst teams in the NFL. Only having during his during his Packer career, I think the Packers only made the playoffs once, maybe twice. It's like, I mean, he didn't have a lot of good quarterbacks to play with. Had he had a Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, or even Barnes that are throwing in the ball, probably could possibly double that touchdown total. I mean, he was fantastic. He could do everything. He could run any route. He was a great deep threat. And yes, the fumble problem, but considering the team that he played with, not the biggest deal in the world. But man, he was a great wide receiver. And again, the fact that he wasn't on this list originally kind of makes me sad because he was truly great and seemingly forgotten about because he is a Hall of Famer. Like, no doubt. Belongs in the Hall of Fame. And if I didn't mention it before, Sterling Sharp, get him in the Hall of Fame. If Calvin Johnson can get into the Hall of Fame, Sterling Sharp belongs there as well. Next, we have the great Don Hutson. Again, played well before I was alive, but he was the original great Packers wide receiver. Greatness. They played for 10 years from 1935 to 1945, 488 receptions during a time where the pass was just not as big a part of a league as it is now. Um, Almost 8,000 receiving yards again. Another set the points that we'll get. This is during a time where passing was not as fun in the eyes of NFL coaches and things as it was to run the ball. 16.4 yards per receptions, 99 touchdowns, which is still the most for a non-quarterback in Packers history. 92-yard long, again, fantastic. Again, in a day where receiving was not the first option, and only one fumble over a 10-year career, again, during a period where tackling was much more vicious. I mean, you could get away with a lot more things, so a lot dirtier. You could tackle as hard as you wanted, and he only had one fumble during his career. Absolutely fantastic. He definitely deserves to be up here. Definitely not talked about a lot in NFL circles these days, but one of the original great wide receivers in the history of the NFL, and he totally deserves the honor, and that's why he's up here as high as he is. Next, we have Devontae. And yes, Devontae is an all-time Packers great wide receiver. He really is. He truly belongs to be up here, no matter what anybody says. It took a little for him to get going, but when he did, he was great. 669 receptions, over 8,000 receiving yards. Again, fantastic over a 7-year period, especially considering how he started. 12.1 yards per reception, 66 yards. Also had a 66, was his longest touchdown reception, and only 5 fumbles, so that's pretty good as well. Great wide receiver, again, great possession wide receiver, can run any route. And, I mean, he was unstoppable during the last couple of years of Packers. I mean, sure, he had his injury issues, but it was still hard to stop. Except in the playoffs where he didn't seemingly play as well. But definitely belongs to be up this high. Fantastic wide receiver. And maybe someday he'll come back to the green and gold. It would be great to see. Probably not going to happen, but, as a Packer fan, I can dream. Here, all right, we have our first in our great tier, Donald Driver. Yes, I'm sorry, Donald Driver's not an all-time great wide receiver. Yes, he leads the Packers in all-time receiving yards with over 10,000. Played for 99 to 2012, 743 receptions, 13.6 yards per reception, which is good. 61 total touchdowns, 85-yard long, 8 fumbles. That'll get a little more fumbles than you would think. But, I mean, he was a compiler. I know Packer fans are probably hating me right now. It's like, but he was. Was he ever really the most dominant wide receiver in the league? No, it wasn't. He never was. But he was a great possession wide receiver. He could always be open. Great safety blanket for Favre and Rodgers. I mean, he totally deserves the praise that he gets. But, I mean, all-time great Packer wide receivers, no, he's not, fortunately. But he's just right below that. And maybe had he won one more Super Bowl, sure, maybe he might have been a little higher. But can't justify him being up in the best of all time. Can't do it. The great Max McGee, who scored the first receiving touchdown in Super Bowl history. He was a great wide receiver in his day. 345 receptions, over 6,000 receiving yards, 18.4 yards per reception, which is fantastic. Especially, again, in the time that he played, 50 touchdowns, 82-yard long, and 6 fumbles, and he was just a brute. He's just a big beast. You could not take him down. I mean, he was more a tight end than he was a receiver, but he is listed as a wide receiver, and he's a great player. I love reading the stories about him during training camp. They're fantastic. I mean, go read some of these old Packer books about training camp in the 60s. It's just so fun to listen to and read. He was a great day. Sad to see he's passed on, but when he was there, he was great. True safety blanket for her number one wide receiver for Bart Starr, and he deserves the praise that he gets today. But not an all-time Packer great, but he's very close. Greg Jennings. Some of you might think he is a little high, but let me talk about him a little bit. 425 receptions, over 6,000 receiving yards, 15.4 yards per reception, which is good. 53 touchdowns, 86-yard long, and 5 fumbles. He was a huge savior for the Packers in the Super Bowl 45. He had 2 touchdowns, over 60 yards. He didn't have as supposedly dominant of a performance as Jordy, but I'd argue he better because of that second touchdown. At the time that he got it, it was definitely a good grab for him to get that. And he's a great wide receiver. Sad to see what happened to his career after. I mean, he went to the Vikings, and you know what happens when the Vikings and other teams in the NFL sort of pick up the Packers' garbage. Not to say that he's garbage, but just for sake of argument, he was used goods. He was a great wide receiver in his day. Sad that the relationship between him and the Packers corroded so fast, but I believe it's been repaired now just fine. And he definitely belongs here, but he's not all-time Packer great. Next we have Jordy, which I waffled on him a lot. Again, he's one of those Packer wide receivers that was great in his time, but he was a compiler. He wasn't the greatest wide receiver at any time. He's never truly the most dominant wide receiver in the league. He never was. Maybe had one truly dominant season, but other than that, then he got injured, and he was never really the same after that, after his injury in 2015, I believe. But yeah, it was just never really the same after that, but in his time, 550 receptions, almost 8,000 receiving yards, so that's good. Definitely better than Jennings. 14.3 yards per reception, 69 total touchdowns, 93-yard long, and 7 fumbles. Good in his day. Like I said, I think his performance in the Super Bowl 45 was great. I just think Greg Jennings' performance was just a little bit better in a more key spot, but both were quintessential in the Packers' Super Bowl win in Super Bowl 45. Next we have... Man, I did not... I was supposed to rearrange these more. Next we have Randall Cobb. Good, not great. He had a great time for the Packers. I don't think he is as good as people remember him to be. I mean, he had a big fumbling problem at times. Couldn't stay healthy. But Randall Cobb, 532 receptions, so 6,000 receiving yards, 11.9 yards per reception, 47 touchdowns, 75-yard long, and like I said, 17 fumbles. Not good at all. But he still deserves his place in NFL history, or in Packers history. I don't think he's as great as people remember him as, and sad to see how his career turned out after he left the Packers. Just never really could do anything after that, but he'll be in the Packers Hall of Fame someday, I'm sure. Antonio Freeman. Again, one of Brett Favre's great options. 431 reception yards, 6,651 yards, 50.4 yards per reception, 57 touchdowns, 84-yard long, and 14 fumbles. So he also had a fumbling problem at times. Had a touchdown in Super Bowl 31. He was a great option for the Packers. Could seemingly catch anything. I mean, he had a couple miraculous plays, especially against the Minnesota Vikings. He was a little bit before my time, so I don't remember him too well, but he was still a great wide receiver in his day for the Packers. Now, here's one that's a really big... Carroll Dale. He is a definitely forgotten Packers wide receiver. He played during the 60s Packers. Was mainly a second option for Bart Starr behind Max McGee. 275 receptions, over 5,000 receiving yards, nearly 20 yards per reception. So that's the best on this list. 35 touchdowns, 89-yard long, and 4 fumbles. Was definitely more of a deep threat for the Packers based on his stats. He was a second option. I just don't know a lot about him, but he's up there in a lot of receiving categories for the Packers. Just me personally don't know a lot about him. That's why he's in the forgotten tier. Doesn't get talked about a lot, but during his day, he was a good option for Bart Starr. Next, we have the great Robert Brooks, who again feels like he's forgotten, to be honest. 306 receiving yards, 306 receptions, over 4,000 receiving yards, 13.8 yards per reception, 33 touchdowns, tied for the longest touchdown reception in NFL history with 99 yards and 5 fumbles. Again, didn't have the longest career with the Packers, and sadly didn't get to play in Super Bowl 31 because he tore his ACL in Week 7. And it was pretty bad injury for him, but he still stayed with the Packers like another year. Really helped popularize the Lambeau Leap, was a great ambassador for that. He could have been more with the Packers. He certainly could have been more had he not been injured. Just one of those what ifs for the Packers in terms of wide receivers. I mean, he was a great wide receiver in his day, and that knee injury really robbed him. Like Sterling Sharp, he's not as great as Sterling Sharp, but he also went to South Carolina, so at the time, or around that era, South Carolina just knew how to produce great wide receivers. But, I mean, just one of those what-ifs. Could have been more, but sadly, isn't what we thought it would be in the end, but still belongs where he is. Next, we have James Jones, another forgotten guy. I know he's on a lot of talk shows and stuff, and NFL Network and stuff like that. 360 receptions, over 5,000 receiving yards, 14.4 yards per reception, which is good. 45 touchdowns, 83-yard long, 10 fumbles, a little bit more of a fumbling problem. Again, more of a deep threat. Not as efficient with the receptions with the Favre and Rodgers, but I mean, he had his moments. He had some great touchdowns, just not as reliable during this time as Jennings or Jordy. But he was still good. He was still unique. I always liked him when he wore his hoodies. Although, I guess if I was playing football, me wearing a hoodie, it's just a bad way for you to get pulled down. Just doesn't sound fun at all. But, I mean, what he did was great. Got a Super Bowl ring, of course, and just one of those forgotten Packers stars, to be honest. Probably be in the Packers Hall of Fame someday, I would think. And last, but certainly least in terms of this, why are they here? Javon Walker. Again, why is Javon Walker in this list? Can someone please tell me why Javon Walker is on a list of the greatest Packers wide receivers of all time? I mean, Boyd Dowler isn't on this list. I probably should have added him in there because he would certainly belong over Javon Walker. I mean, Javon Walker had his moments at the time, but from where he was drafted, I think you can consider him a bust. I think you can consider him a bust. Let's just go over his stats a little bit. 270 receiving yard or receptions, not great. A little under 2,500 receiving yards, again, not great. Played from the Packers from 2002 to 2005, not a long time, and didn't really do much after that. Went to Denver for a little bit, didn't do much. 22 touchdowns, 79-yard long, and 4 fumbles. He just didn't have a great career with the Packers. He had a great night, and that great night for Brett Favre after his father died. He was definitely a big recipient of a lot of deep touchdowns for Brett Favre in that matchup. But, I mean, Javon Walker is so forgettable. And I think, to be honest, you can consider him a bust. You can certainly consider Javon Walker a bust when it comes to Green Bay Packers wide receivers, but that's the list. Let me know what you think down below. Make sure to subscribe, comment, and give it a like. If you want to see me break down more of the Packers position groups in terms of great all-time status, I would be happy to do so. Still, I would still have to do wider tight ends, offensive linemen, a lot of the defensive positions. Definitely a lot of great players there. But let me know what you think, if I think I should do more in the future. But let me know what you think down below. Have a great day, and as always, God bless.